Welcome back to Leading Today. Thank you for joining me. This is where we explore what it really takes to lead with both strategy and heart. But today, I want to talk about something many high achieving leaders struggle with. That is, taking up space strategically, and how creativity and critical thinking need to live in the same space if we want real, lasting impact. I'm going to take a look at why stepping away from constant doing can actually unlock better ideas, sharper analysis, and more innovation. And really, how emotionally intelligent leaders can build that into a kind of space for their teams as a strategic advantage, not a luxury. But I want to take you back a little bit. I want to take you back to when I first entered my doctoral program at USC in organizational change and leadership. I came in with the mindset that if I wasn't reading, researching, or writing, I was falling behind. My identity as a scholar felt tightly tied to constant effort and visible output. That was my reality. But early in the program, I had a professor who challenged that belief head on, and he was phenomenal. He said, in essence, studying and writing all the time may be a discipline, but it's not always the most effective way for creativity and insight to emerge. He started talking about the brain and behavioral science and cognitive capacity, like how our minds need periods of rest and distance to make new connections and generate really just original ideas. Honestly, that idea felt almost dangerous to me. I know how I like to study. I knew that staying on a regimented program was important in order to get through the doctoral program. So this all seemed very counterintuitive to me. In fact, it scared me. The idea of stepping away from work to do better work? How could that possibly be efficient? But as he explained the research on what's called the incubation period in creativity, that creative breakthroughs, they're the kinds of things that often come after you stop consciously thinking about the problem. Once I processed that perspective and that concept, it all began to make sense to me. Eventually, I decided to trust his expertise and experiment. I started to give myself permission to step away from my writing, studying and research with intention, like periodic moments of just breaks. Sometimes it meant a walk, maybe it meant a conversation, or simply doing something completely different for a while. Heck, there were times that I took parts of a weekend and I went to a museum just to completely shut my mind off from reading, writing, or researching. Sometimes I took an hour or two and I did lunch with a friend. What I noticed, though, surprised me. When I came back to my work, the ideas were fresher. Connections that I hadn't seen before started to appear. My analysis just kind of deepened. Solutions and frameworks that had felt stuck suddenly felt accessible. Creativity and innovation and critical thinking all began to flow much more freely once I stopped gripping the work so tightly. So to this day, that lesson remains one of the most valuable of my doctoral journey. And I carry it forward into how I think about leadership. I have offered this concept to many leaders. I talk about if stepping away can transform an individual's creativity, what might it do for a whole team? If a leader is wise, and emotionally intelligent, then there should be enough space for creativity to emerge among the team. But let's connect this to the research because this isn't just a nice idea. So, studies on creativity show that many breakthroughs happen after a period of active focus, and it's followed by a period of stepping away, for instance, what psychologists call the incubation effect. I mentioned that a moment ago. And in reviews of dozens of experiments, researchers have consistently found that people who take a break from a complex task and do something undemanding often come back with more ideas and more original solutions than those who push straight through. So, why is that happening? Well, there's several things actually. One is the subconscious keeps working in the background. It's quietly connecting ideas while your conscious mind rests or focuses elsewhere. And then another is how stepping away, it just helps you forget fixing or unhelpful ideas or fixating on unhelpful ideas, which reduces the mental rigidity and opens the door to new approaches. But the other thing is that it's doing a simple, different type of activity during a break rather than another demanding task. This seems to enhance the effect even more. So at the same time, we know that psychological safety, which is the belief that you can speak up, make mistakes, and take risks without being punished, which this is very important in creative, innovative environments. It is a critical driver of creativity and learning on teams. So when people feel safe, they share half formed ideas, they ask better questions, and they challenge assumptions, which is exactly the raw material that critical thinking needs. And then, of course, emotional intelligence. When you add that in, it's the connective tissue. Research here has talked about it many times over, but that emotionally intelligent leaders, these are the leaders who are self aware, they're empathetic, they're skilled at managing emotions. They create the environments where people can feel heard and supported and motivated to contribute their best work. They feel safe. In those environments, creativity and critical thinking are not competition, they actually feed each other. So when we talk about taking up space strategically, we're talking about really three things coming together. It's about protecting time and mental space for incubation to happen. It's about building psychological safety so people will actually use that space to think and question and create. And then it's about leading with emotional intelligence so that the space feels supported and purposeful, not indulgent. But, here's the leadership shift that I want to invite you all to consider. Time and space for thinking are not extras, they're strategic assets. And leaders who are emotionally intelligent and who trust their teams, they will intentionally design that space, the time that is without constant output or meetings or fire drills because they understand that's where better strategies, more innovative ideas, and wiser decisions are born. They know that endless busyness, it looks productive, but often produces shallow thinking and, copy and paste types of solutions. But in other words, making room for creativity and critical thinking to dwell together is not soft. It's a disciplined choice to prioritize long term value over short term optics. So let's make this practical. I want to share three tools leaders can use to foster this kind of space for themselves and for their teams. I always want to try and leave you all with some type of tip or tool that you can put into practice. So here's tool number one. I want you to build protected incubation blocks. This is the first tool and it's really simple, but it's really rarely practiced. So build in periods of incubation blocks into your calendar and your team's rhythm. Research on the incubation effect suggests that after focused work, a break that involves an undemanding different activity can significantly boost creative problem solving. So instead of scheduling your team like wall to wall, experiment with cycles like this: the focus sprint, 60 to 90 minutes of deep work on a strategic issue or complex challenge. The incubation block, which is 20 to 30 minutes, where people step away, they go for a walk, they reflect, maybe they do light administrative work or something, or they switch to a different low demand task. And then return and refine. This is where you come back together to generate or refine ideas with fresh eyes. Now, as a leader, your emotional intelligence shows up here in how you frame it. You can say something like, "Hey, team, we're not stepping away because the work isn't urgent. No, no. We're stepping away because the work matters and we want our best thinking on it." Now, that framing, that helps people feel safe using the space rather than feeling guilty. And it also signals that you value quality of thinking over sheer volume of activity. Now, tool number two is about designing psychologically safe idea spaces. This tool is intentionally designing idea spaces where that psychological safety is the norm, not the exception. And studies show that when psychological safety is high, teams are much more willing to share unconventional ideas, they admit uncertainty, and they learn from mistakes, all of which are essential for creativity and critical thinking. Leaders strongly influence this climate through their everyday behaviors. So, here's a few kind of concrete practices you can use. You can start sessions with curiosity, not conclusions. And what does that look like? Well, you can just ask, "Hey, what are we not seeing yet?" Or "What assumptions might we be making here?" Instead of giving your answers first. The other is normalizing imperfection. Too often we do not do this. So say explicitly, "This is a draft space. Half formed ideas are welcome." That framing reduces evaluation anxiety and increases idea flow. And then the other is respond and say thank you. Do that before you critique. So when someone takes a risk to share an idea, first acknowledge the contribution. "Thank you so much for sharing that." And then move into the constructive questions, not constructive criticism, constructive questions. These micro behaviors are emotionally intelligent signals. They tell your team, "Hey, your voice is safe here. Your thinking is valued, even before it's polished." Over time, that kind of environment becomes a really powerful engine for innovation and learning, and your team prospers. Now, tool number three, this is where you can model the blend of critical thinking and EQ. And it really is about modeling. As leaders, you set the tone for how critical thinking and emotional intelligence show up together. We know that leaders who combine analytical thinking and emotional awareness, they make decisions that are both effective and human centered. Critical thinking keeps you grounded in data and logic, and emotional intelligence ensures you understand the human impact and the relational context of those decisions. And you can model this in a few ways. This blend, you can model it in a couple of different ways. But one is thinking out loud. When making a decision, briefly share both the data that you considered and the human factors you weighed. Another is name the trade offs. Acknowledge when a choice is right for the strategy, but hard for people, and show what support will be in place. And then the other is invite co creation. My goodness, this is powerful. Ask, how do you see this? Or what are we missing from your perspective? So that you integrate diverse viewpoints into the thinking process. And remember, this is a safe space. So when your team sees that you hold logic and empathy together, you give them permission to do the same. You're modeling that behavior. You're teaching them that rigorous thinking and deep care are not opposites, they're partners. As we close here, I want to bring this back to the lesson that I learned at USC. I went into my doctoral program believing that productivity meant constant motion. Like I could not turn my brain or my time off. But my wise professor taught me that real creativity and deeper critical thinking often shows up when we trust ourselves enough to step away and let the mind breathe. Leaders today have an opportunity to do the same for their teams, to treat space not as an absence of work, but as a strategic container for better work, to design rhythms where creativity and critical thinking dwell together, to lead with enough emotional intelligence to know when to push, when to pause, and when to simply make room. So here's my invitation to you. This week, schedule one true incubation block for yourself on a piece of work that matters. I want you to create one psychologically safe idea space for your team, even if it's just 30 minutes. That is okay too. And in your next big decision, consciously bring both your analytical mind and your empathetic heart to the table and share those insights and that data out loud. Let your team know how you're thinking about this so they understand and they too can model it. Hey, if this resonated with you, please share this episode with another leader who might need permission to rethink how they're using time, pressure, and space on their team. But as always, thank you for joining me on Leading Today with Dr. Lisa Bagby. I'm Dr. Lisa Bagby. Please like and subscribe and follow. And until next time, keep leading with strategy, with courage, and with heart.